It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. So you probably know this, but Judd Apatow is one of the busiest and most notable names in comedy right now. And he got that way mostly by working behind the scenes. He wrote on The Larry Sanders Show. He ran The Ben Stiller Show. He directed Knocked Up and Funny People and a bunch of other movies. He produced The Big Sick and Trainwreck and Girls and Crashing. But he actually got started as a stand-up back in the day, like way back in the day. I mean, this is 1992 on the HBO Young Comedians special.
My uncle, he's got one of these electronic voice boxes, yet he's really happy. He thinks it's like funny. He's like, how you doing? I'm Bob.
Oh yeah, solid gold. Now he's back on stage because I guess he didn't have enough stuff to do. Anyway, he's been performing live for a few years now. He's got his first ever hour-long solo special. It's called Judd Apatow, The Return. It debuts on Netflix this week. Let's hear a little bit of it. This clip is toward the beginning of the act, and like the sort of, seasoned professional that he is, Judd knows what gets the crowd going. A reading of a poem that he wrote in high school.
I found this poem I wrote. It's called Divorce. It's kind of sad. Do you want to hear it? Okay. It gives you a little snapshot to my young life. It starts off with a few fights. They bark a lot, but nobody bites. But after a while, the fighting begins. They got worse and worse, and nobody wins. Don't be sad. I'm rich. I'm very rich. This boy is me. It's okay. It's okay. Okay, the kids always run into a corner and hide. The parents say it's natural. You know they lied. For me, there was separation with lots of tears. Going out with my friends, marijuana and beers. Not much, not much. Then they get back together and things are okay, but that doesn't last. No way. Kind of a Dr. Seuss kind of a rhyme scheme there.
Judd Apatow, welcome back to Bullseye. It's great to have you on the show.
It's been too long.
That's a genuinely terrible poem. Like the extent to which that poem, even I think in the context of a 16-year-old or however old you were when you wrote that poem, it is truly awful.
What's wonderfully wrong about it is my parents were going through this terrible divorce. As a kid, I had an awareness that it was good for my creativity. And so I sat down and wrote this poem. I showed nobody. It was the first and last poem I ever wrote. There wasn't like 50 after it. I just had some exercise, wrote this poem, but it actually describes where I was as a kid, which was trying to monetize my pain.
So why are you've been doing stand-up at least a little bit since you started, since that tour for Funny People, right?
I did stand up a little bit just to write jokes for Funny People, but I wasn't doing it from my point of view. I was doing some jokes that I thought would work for those characters, but it certainly woke me up to the idea that I missed it. And then when I worked with Amy Schumer on Trainwreck and she would come back from these tours while she was writing, I would just get jealous. It was literally just jealous. Like, oh my God, she's living the dream that I had when I was a kid. And then when we started shooting, I said, I'm going to go on stage just to amuse you. I'm going to go on once just so you could see what it was like. And I went up at the Comedy Cellar one night, and much to her chagrin, it went well. She was hoping to see a disaster. And they were nice enough to say, hey, anytime you want to come in, we'll put you up. Now, no one had ever said that to me when I first did stand-up. I was always begging for stage time. So every night when we wrapped, I would just go do stand-up, and I had the best time doing it.
What's amazing to me is, a lot of your stand-up is about your family.
Mm-hmm.
You have this family that you're obviously very devoted to, but you also have the most demanding day job in the world, and you've decided to abandon your family for a second highly demanding night job.
They certainly have noticed. But I actually only get out one night a week, sometimes two. And then when they want to go do things without me, I'll just go run to a comedy club. So I haven't had to abandon them too often. But it's a great way to stay in touch with the audience and to not get stale, not get rusty. I mean, there's a lot to be said for talking directly to a crowd as a way to stay fresh with what you do. If you just sit in the house all day long, then what are you going to write jokes about? Different furniture polishes?
That's a perfect example of something that's inside of a house. Good work. Carpet would also have worked.
Carpet.
Comedy's in the specifics, though.
I love lamp. I love lamp.
Was it scary for you?
It was scary to admit that I wanted to do it, and there certainly were people who said, "This seems to demean everything you've accomplished. Like, why would you want to do it?" And I thought, I'm not proud of any of my stature. I'd rather be known as a comic than a director. I never thought there was any esteem to being a director. I'm much more impressed with Maria Bamford than I am of any director. So what was scary was, can I deserve to be here? Can I be on a lineup, with all the great people at the Comedy Cellar that summer and not be the worst part of the show? How can I raise my game so that I'm at the same level as a lot of the people that I admire? And that was fun. I mean, it's fun to have a new goal that's really, really hard. It's like taking up skiing when you're 70.
Well, I mean, I think there is something to be said for the fact that, while you're a well-known and well-liked public figure who's made very successful films and television shows, nothing about your persona is heroic.
No, not at all.
It's not like,
I'm a bland Jewish guy.
Chris Rock walks on stage, and Chris Rock, obviously one of the most brilliant stand-up comics of all time. And, Chris Rock walks on stage to be a conquering hero. Like, there's no doubt that, while part of it may be about examining himself or, being negative about himself, it's not that he's, purely externally focused or something, but like he's there to thrill you.
Sure.
I don't think anybody has that relationship with Judd Apatow.
No, they don't expect me to preach. They don't scream, "Preach!" when I get up there. It's very much just a sharing of my life, what I'm going through. A lot of comedians, their whole thing is, I have the answers. Here's what's wrong. Here's what we should do. And my point of view is, I really hope I'm not ruining my children. That I don't really know if the choices I've made have been correct. I don't know if I'm doing a good job in any aspect of my life. And here's why I'm concerned. And that is generally about it.
Let's listen to some of Judd Apatow's new comedy special, which is called The Return. Speaking of ruining his children, one of the questions that he faces is basically, what's the deal with people who decide to smoke pot with their kids when they become adults, who try to make the pivot from being a parent to being a bud when their kid turns 18? Let's take a listen.
See, I couldn't do that. I couldn't smoke pot with my kids because if they saw how weird I get, I could never punish them or have any credibility again. Because I know where my brain would go. It would be like, I made you. Like you didn't exist, and then I made love with your mother. And now you're here. I taught you language. You didn't know what a chicken was, and I would say, hey, that is called a chicken. And now when you see a chicken, you call it a chicken. You used to live in my balls. Like for real, you used to live inside me with thousands of other brothers and sisters. What were they all like? Then you try to punish them, and your kid's like, you can't punish me. You said I live in your balls.
How is it different for you doing stand-up as I mean, you quit in what, the early, mid-90s?
92. I did the HBO Young Comedian special.
Alongside like a murderer's row
Sure.
of other stand-up comics.
It was Ray Romano, Andy Kindler, Janine Garofalo, Bill Bellamy, Nick DiPaolo. And the Ben Stiller show just got picked up by Fox, and I suddenly was, running this show with Ben, and I was certainly underqualified to do it. So all of my time went to the show. And in a very organic way, I realized I have no time to go to a club after a 16-hour day. And then by the time it had spit me out, 8 months later, I thought, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be a stand-up comedian because I keep getting this other work, which in a week pays me what I was making for a year in stand-up. And this must be the universe telling me this is what I should do. And I was very intimidated by my friends who were geniuses. So I would see Jim Carrey and Adam Sandler and people like that. And I always felt like, I was trying to describe it to someone. It's like if you were starting a band and your best friend was starting Radiohead and you thought, maybe I shouldn't start a band. I don't think I can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if I was on stage before or after Andy Kindler or Maria Bamford, there's only two reactions you can have. One is perfect art is achievable in our lifetimes. I need to dedicate all of my life's energy towards that goal.
Yes.
And the other would be like, I'm going to find a new lane.
Well, here's the thing. I've had to accept that there is different ways to express yourself. I'm a Jackson Browne fan. I like people who share their emotions very directly. That doesn't mean I don't love Radiohead, but I feel like I'm more in a Jackson Browne lane in how I express myself. So in comedy, yes, you have Maria Bamford, who you could say is the Radiohead of comedy, and then you have people like Ray Romano, who I'm probably more in the world of someone who's just sharing the absurdity of dealing with this life in a very direct, here's who I am way. I mean, I remember seeing Stephen Wright when he first started performing, and it blew your mind open, but you always thought, I'm never going to do that. But that doesn't mean there isn't great value to the style I work in. I don't do Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I do Knocked Up, and it's taken me a while to realize that's okay. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this.
Crashing, this show that you make with Pete Holmes, or that Pete Holmes makes with you, is also about that weird relationship that comics have with each other. Mm-hmm. What's different, do you think, about the way that comics relate to each other from accountants or construction workers or advertising executives?
I think one commonality is that comedians are not comfortable with how everything works. That as a group of people, male and female, they're all saying, this is all so weird. This life is so weird. The way we behave is so weird. The power structure is bizarre. The social aspect of life is bizarre. And we're all dissecting it just to understand it, to try to survive it. And I don't know if every other profession is doing that. When you sit with a table of comedians, I don't think they're any more troubled than most other people, but I think they have a fascination by how it all works. Like, why do we relate to each other in this way? How did my parents screw me up? Why do people make money for doing this? They could just examine all of these issues that I think just bug us. I remember being a kid and listening to George Carlin and really relating to his disgust. And the Marx Brothers were like that. Duck Soup, it was just a diatribe against politics and governments and war. And I related as a kid because I thought, yeah, there's so much that's just... I love that there'd be a moment where they would just humiliate some rich guy in a tuxedo.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about it, right, is it's like this weird kind of, it's this group of people who are relating over being alienated.
Yes, I do think that's it. And that's also why comedians enjoy each other, because it's always a funny conversation. And I think that comedians have a great sense of humor about all of our wounds and the mistakes that we make. When comedians get together, they love to share the awful thing they just did, the terrible thing that's happened to them.
It's like being with, I spent a lot of time when I was a kid with vets because my dad was a vets activist. And it's like there's just this expectation that there is an open wound and everyone is going to get a kick out of talking about it.
Yes, exactly.
Like both of those things. Like it could very easily be that their expectation is there's an open wound and everyone's going to commiserate and be miserable about it. And there is some commiseration and misery,
Yes.
but like mostly it's this kind of unstated thing, like everything is broken. Let's have a nice time together about it.
Yes, that you want to run to your friends to tell them who broke your heart and how, and go over all the details. I think that one thing I noticed when I started doing stand-up comedy again was it changes your brain in a very specific way, which is when bad things happen, you're kind of excited because you can turn it into something of value. So I threw out the first pitch at the Mets game, and it did not go well. And as soon as it happened, I thought, well, at least that went so bad that it'll make for a funny story. And in a way, as a comedian, that's the thing you have that most people don't have, is the second something weird that's just so painful happens, part of your brain goes, I'm so glad it happened. This is going to be hilarious to tell people about.
It seems like the way the comedy world has changed, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, it has really been a wake-up call to some people in the industry to understand the way that, like, while they thought of themselves as the ultimate outsider and inclusive of all outsiders, that actually people with different circumstances were not included and were alienated and hurt by the way that they were related to in this world. Mm-hmm. You know, like a buddy of mine who hosts the sister show of this podcast, which is called Pop Rocket, Guy Branum, is, you know, one of the most brilliant and hilarious people I've ever known. And he wrote this piece about the way that he felt alienated from the comics table at a club in New York.
Oh, I read that. I disagreed with a lot of that because I don't think that it's the same as the era he's discussing. I think he's talking about an era that was where you had a lot of guys who liked to be rough on each other and insult each other. There was a few of them that leaned right a little bit, and it was a tough table at the Comedy Cellar. But when you go to the Comedy Cellar now, it's a very inclusive place. There's a lot of women. There's people of all kinds there, and it isn't that. But I could see why it would be traumatizing to walk into that, because there is nothing scarier than to walk up to a table of comedians that you don't know. And in fact, if you watch Crashing, a lot of the jokes are about Pete trying to sit with people and them looking at him like, who the are you? And how do you earn a place at that table? But a lot of that is our own insecurity about how funny we are and also how good we are at jumping in with new people. But I do find, especially at the Comedy Cellar, that I think that they have evolved in who they book, and it's a much more progressive place these days.
It seems like a lot of people are getting more understanding. And I think especially like, for example, recently with all the issues of sexual harassment and assault, of the ways in which other factors besides the survival of the fittest affect the trajectory of people's careers. Like one of the things that I had not spent much time thinking about until the Louis C.K. revelations. And like, you know, I really admired Louis, and he'd been on the show before and always been very kind to me. He directed one of my favorite movies. Was the way in which, you know, for women, and I just had never thought about this because I'm a dude, and had never had this experience, but the way that like harassment, even relatively low-grade harassment, ends people's careers because they just say, I don't want to live this way.
Absolutely.
This isn't worth it to me.
I think that you want to work in an environment that's friendly. So whatever job you have, say you're headed into a law office and everyone is cutthroat and vicious and backbiting, you might go, I don't like the law anymore. And if a comedy club or the comedy world is like that, a lot of sensitive souls who have a lot to say and want to express themselves, they will give up. And that, I think, is a very sad part about it. I do think that men are often completely tuned out to the effect they have on women when they're disrespectful, how much it hurts not to be treated as an equal. Lena Dunham, wrote a great chapter in her book about this, where she said that there were people that would, want to hang out, and they were, sometimes directors she admired, and she felt great that they respected her and wanted to talk shop and make a connection. But then in some circumstances, it was all the beginning of a very creepy advance on her. And that she felt so terrible when she realized that it wasn't about respect. And I think that's something that men are going to begin to tune into, how much that they can hurt people, and men who do it to women or men.
It seems like you've sort of taken it upon yourself as part of your public persona to be vociferous about this stuff, to allow yourself to be mad about this stuff. I mean, you were so persistent and intense in your condemnation of Bill Cosby, which you do some Bill Cosby material in the special. It seemed from the outside like it was about you kind of getting this new perspective on this world that you lived in. I mean, like, comedy is your home.
In some ways, the Cosby thing broke my heart because he meant so much to me and was one of the main reasons I loved comedy. And I was talking to a friend who was a victim who decided not to come forward. And Cosby had his lawyer out there saying all these women were liars. And then she told me the story, and it was the same as the other stories. And I just thought, you're going to call all these women liars? So you committed a crime against them once, and now you're going to attack them again? You're going to try to destroy these people? Off. And no one was talking about it. Just a few people seemed upset. And I thought, how come no one's upset? How come no one is furious? Shouldn't you be furious if people you care about get hurt like this? And I did make a conscious choice to just not shut up about it. Like, I feel like this is going to go away if I stop talking. And it was it seemed a little unhinged at times, but shouldn't we be unhinged about a guy knocking people unconscious and raping them? Like, isn't that the thing you're supposed to get deeply upset about? And I do think that because of that, because of Trump, people are slowly waking up that there's a lot of crime happening. There's a lot of abuse happening. And it is a very messy time. And there's a lot of concerns, about making sure these things are handled properly and the right people get dealt with. But the world is changing now. I do hope that, a guy in an office, when he has the idea to do something bad, he might think, if I do this, my career might be over. And I think that's an important fear to have. You're not supposed to treat people that way. It really does bother me because it's so easy to be kind to people. It's so easy to treat people well. I said on stage, it's so easy not to be a sexual harasser. You do nothing, and you've already proven yourself to be a great guy. Just do nothing. And hopefully this will lead to positive change.
Did you think about the way that your own power operates in the world, or the way that you've structured your own organization?
I think,
I'm not suggesting because you're
I'm just saying I didn't do it. I'm just saying I didn't do it,
harassing people, but rather because I have a dozen employees or whatever, but it certainly made me think I have to think about the way that in my weird little organization our structures operate to make sure that I am not supporting this.
I think what's interesting is that people tend to hire people that they're comfortable with. If you're a good person, you tend to have some nice people around you. I would assume if we checked out Team Tom Hanks, You know, he probably has nice people. And I don't really put much thought into it other than I'm attracted to a certain type of hopefully creative and kind person, male or female, and that in my office everyone respects each other. And if they don't, they know I care about it. They know they can come to me even if it has nothing to do with harassment, if they're just in conflict with each other, that I'm there to help them figure out how they can be happy and comfortable and do their best work, and how to get along with the person, not to ignore them, but to try to figure out what's at the root of it. And that takes some work, but that's essential. And of course, I learned an enormous amount from Lena Dunham and Jenny Connor, watching how they ran girls, how they hired people, how inclusive they were in staffing.
What did you learn?
Well, I think, in the world of comedy, you'd go into these rooms and it would be 10 guys and 1 woman. And, as soon as I started working with Lena and Jenny, and they said, well, that's not going to be how we do this. We're going to be much closer to a 50-50 situation. And we're going to look for a lot of female directors, and we're going to have a multicultural crew and a lot more women on the crew. And you have to make a choice to do that. It's very easy to not do it. You could just say, hire the crew. And usually your line producer will just get you 80 guys. You have to say, no, this is what we're going to do. Like, for instance, we have a lot of veterans who work on our shows because we were talking to the Easter Seals people, and they said it's very hard for veterans to get work when they come back. And we have this program to get them crew jobs on TV shows. And we said, great. And so suddenly all these jobs that might go to like your friend's nephew, all these favor jobs, become entry points for veterans to get into the business. And it's been like the best thing that we ever did. But you have to make a conscious choice to diversify. And most shows are slow to do that. It's changing, but it only changes because a place like HBO says you have to have 50% female directors. That's just our rule. And you know what? That's world changing. And then the most important thing is you can't hire the same 50% who are already in the business. You have to give people breaks. You have to give people of color breaks. You have to give them their first opportunity to direct. And that's what changes things, is getting people into the business who weren't there before.
Are you proud of your new special?
I am proud of it. It's very hard to watch yourself. Especially if your self-esteem is shaky, to sit in an editing room and here's how I walk, here's how I talk. Oh, look how self-satisfied I am there. Just shut up. It's very hard to like that guy. And I think that's how most people feel when they hit editing. It is tough to stare at yourself. That's why a lot of people like Owen Wilson will say, I never watch my movies. I have seen almost none of them. Adam Driver says that. And I do get it. There's a part of you that just wants to do the work and then run away for other people to judge. But I did get to a place where I was very happy with the special. There's a lot of fun, long stories. I show a lot of photographs and illustrate stories in a way that I think is interesting. And when I was completely done, I thought, I think I did what I set out to do there.
What do you feel like you set out to do?
Not suck. No, I set out to be myself and share my life and share what I've been through and what my concerns are, and to just be open and have a conversation with the audience that's really funny and true.
Well, Judd, it's always really nice to have you on the show. Thank you for coming back.
It was great to be here.
Judd Apatow. Go check out his stand-up special now. It's called Judd Apatow: The Return. It's on Netflix this week.